Mike Tyson. With the heavyweight championship crown came all the jewels, the million-dollar mansions and luxury cars and beautiful women. So how could this legendary champ who fought so hard, who achieved so much, end up losing it all both in and out of the ring? Let's look behind the tabloid headlines and discover how this great fighter became the fallen champ.
And Tyson was never meant to be a great champion. He didn't have the character. He was meant to be a shooting star. He was meant to be a sensational shooting star.
It was like watching a pilot for a movie. Here's this kid, 13 years old. He's in reformatory. His life is about to head towards Attica or death.
He was a great, great boxer.
Walked the customer was taking my gloves off. I said, what do you think? He said, that's the heavyweight champ of the world.
That was a right to the body and an uppercut to the head, and Berbick is down.
And he's down again and in serious trouble.
He cannot control his temper.
Mrs. Tyson did not want to sign a domestic violence complaint.
He was a womanizer. There's no other way to describe him. He loved women, and women loved him.
And I was like, saying, no, get off me, please, get off me. And he was like, don't fight me, don't fight me.
And I think that Mike Tyson is unjustly incarcerated. I think in Mike Tyson's particular case, the due process was derailed. We got to put it back on track again.
I was asked, after 3 years in prison, could Mike Tyson beat Lennox Lewis? And I said, Mike Tyson can beat Lennox Lewis after 3 minutes in the electric chair.
And I still believe I'm the best fighter in the world.
Michael Gerard Tyson was born into crushing poverty on June 30th, 1966. Tyson doesn't like to talk about his early days on the streets of a Brooklyn ghetto. There are no pictures of his mother, Lorna, but Michael was the third child in the family fathered by Jimmy Kirkpatrick. Kirkpatrick never married Lorna Tyson, so it was her last name that he was given. The Tysons, close to destitute, lived in Brownsville, one of Brooklyn's toughest neighborhoods. Kirkpatrick abandoned the family before Mike's second birthday. And some would say Tyson spent most of his first 25 years searching for a father figure to replace him. Young Mike was physically huge, but he had a sensitive nature, a high-pitched voice, and a lisp. The other children in the neighborhood picked on him mercilessly, taunting him with the name Big Head Mike. Friends say Tyson probably started fighting on the street as a matter of self-preservation as much as anything else. Perhaps it was for food and money to survive. Perhaps it was rage born out of the teasing and taunting he'd endured. Tyson turned to muggings and robberies and would be arrested several times before the age of 12.
Mike says when he was 9 years old, he was hanging out with kids 13, 14 years old because he was physically their size, but mentally, he wasn't there.
He talked a lot about, seemingly unashamedly, about some of the bad things he did, mugging old ladies and doing, pulling off these mugging incidents, and as if, this is me and this was part of me, and take it for its worth.
Tyson was in and out of reformatories, winding up in the Tryon School for Boys in upstate Johnstown, New York. Tyson had already decided he wanted to be a boxer and asked to see a staff member named Bobby Stewart, who'd been a professional and who taught at the facility. Stewart told the 12-year-old if he wanted to box, he'd have to straighten out. The words changed Tyson's life forever.
I remember him the first time I saw him, they're marching, two of the biggest staff on campus were marching him through from their place to ours. They said, he's coming. We had to put him in a holding room, lockup room. And they said, Stewie, to me, they said, he's bad. He's uncontrollable, fighting everything. He doesn't go his way. He said, Mr. Stewart, he said, I want to become a fighter. And I said, yeah, so are the rest of these guys. I said, but if you look, it takes you got to be a fighter. You got to be tough, disciplined. He said, you obviously aren't, or you wouldn't be here in the first place. And I said, I'll work with you. I said, if your behavior continues, one slip, I says, and you're done. I'm not going to spend my time. So it was just remarkable. I told him, when you go to school, I said, I don't care if you flunk every subject, but you behave. You behave, you don't act out, and you try.
For 12-year-old Mike Tyson, perfecting the moves he learned from Stewart became an obsession. Long after lights out in the reform school, guards would hear Tyson grunting as he practiced into the night in the dark in his room. Perfecting technique became Tyson's obsession, and it didn't stop when he left trying, as Stewart found out when they went back into the ring.
He hit me with a jab. I'd never been hit with a jab like that ever. It rocked me, but I couldn't let him know. I grabbed him and tied him up, and so I acted like nothing went on. Boom, hit me again. Again, I tied him. I don't think he knew, because I wouldn't let on. If I let on, I couldn't let him overtake the staff.
Bobby Stewart had trained in a small gym above the police station in the tiny town of Catskill, New York, learning his boxing from a veteran teacher named Cus D'Amato. D'Amato had also coached 2 world champions, Floyd Patterson and Jose Torres. So when Stewart's pupil Mike Tyson showed real promise, it was only natural that he would bring Tyson to D'Amato for a tryout. In 1979, the young Mike Tyson first climbed into this ring, and with D'Amato looking on, began to spar with Stewart.
He was 27 years old, Stewart, and a former professional fighter. So obviously someone who should handle a 12-year-old kid. And Tyson showed extraordinary power and forced Stewart to open up to a point just to keep him in his place.
You know, we always won 3 rounds. And after the second round, he was forcing me, pushing me into the corner and stuff. I popped him. It wasn't really that hard, but it made his nose bleed in the spur.
He got a bloody nose. And after the second round, I told him I had seen enough.
And Mike said, we never stop after 2 rounds. We always go 3 rounds. And I saw Cus look over at one of the old timers he was with. And I said, boy, I got his attention already. We went to the 3rd round. He was as good as ever. And right there, I walked over to him, and I walked to Cus. Cus was taking my gloves off. And I said, what do you think? He said, it's a heavyweight champion of the world.
At age 12, after a start that was far from promising, including crime, reform school, and no father, Mike Tyson's life suddenly had possibilities that didn't involve prison. Veteran trainer Cus D'Amato not only agreed to work with the young fighter, he took Tyson into the home he shared with Camille Ewald. The couple already had several young boxers living with them at the time. But when first offered the chance to live in the huge white house with its sprawling lawns, and when told he'd have a room of his own, Tyson couldn't believe it.
He said, here's a kid coming out of a bad setting, going through a lot of stuff fast, moving in, a black kid moving in with I think all white people. It's hard to adjust. I mean, he was scared. When I first brought him down here, I brought him into Cus's driveway. He said, what am I going to do? What's this? I said, this is where you're going to stay. Me? What am I going to do here? Take the garbage out?
It was like watching a pilot for a movie. Here's this kid, 13 years old. He's in reformatory. His life is about to head towards Attica or death. And there's Cus, this then, 72-year-old old Italian guy from the Belmont section of the Bronx, who's thinking his career was over. He had these 2 great champions in the 50s, Jose Torres and Floyd Patterson, and now he just was working with amateurs and delinquent kids, and he gets a new lease on life. Bobby Stewart brings him this unmistakable prodigy who's a monster in the gym. And I think that prolonged Cus's life and saved Mike's life.
Tyson's new surrogate family was headed by D'Amato, who was already a boxing legend, having trained 2 world champions. When D'Amato talked, people in the fight business listened. Reporters and camera crews visited the small gym and Catskill home regularly. They saw that Tyson had immense potential, and they noticed he wasn't the typical rough street kid.
Mike was shy. He was quiet. He was affectionate. He would come up to Camille in the kitchen and give her a hug, or even with the other boxers. And in the documentary that we made, there's a time when he takes this kid, Frankie, and just goes like this with him. And he could be playful, and he could be moody. He'd be, sad some days, happy others. And he was very determined about the way he was in the gym. He had a lot of concentration in the gym. And he was very fast.
when you walk into the house, there's a kitchen table, and there's like a bench. It's further that goes around this one, and Mike is sitting there. And I look at him, and he's glaring at me. I look at this kid, and you know, I thought he was probably like 18 or 20 years old. And then when they told me he was only 13, I just couldn't believe it.
I love boxing too, and I like doing it for myself. But you know, I feel so bad, you know, like if anything goes wrong, when I look sloppy, so many people that, you know, help me and everything to get me up here, and I just don't want to let them down.
I can remember Mike asking me to borrow my bicycle. And I said, sure, you can take a ride on my bicycle. And he was looking, you know, he just couldn't believe that I would give him my bicycle. And then he broke the pedal, you know, and he was just waiting for me to, I guess, to explode. And when I said, don't worry about it, Mike, it's no big thing, it's just a pedal. And you could just see, he was just shocked that someone, you know, would do things like that for him.
That's it, see, ain't no way he's gonna hit you then, right? And remember, it's always good to throw the punch where you could hit him and he can't hit you. That's what the science of boxing
trained to get away from punches, not only defensively to save himself, but to create openings for his power and for his speed. And he was taught that specific style, to elude punches, to slip the straight, and to weave the round, and to explode punches in the opening.
I remember Coach showing him how to throw the uppercut with the proper snap, and Mike would come right over here in the mirror and just practice it for, like, you know, round after round.
With D'Amato as the teacher, Tyson became an obsessive student of boxing. Not just technique, its history. While in the gym, he practiced D'Amato's peekaboo style, fighting with one's hands high, as if in a defensive screen. At home, he would spend even more time practicing moves, as he had late into the night in the reform school. And his spare time would be dedicated to studying old boxing films of fighters like Henry Armstrong and Jack Johnson.
He studied the fighters. He studied their mannerisms. He became a boxing expert. He knew more about boxing fights than almost any human being alive.
That's it, there you go. Now you got, again. Who's the last guy to stop? Time.
Teenaged Mike Tyson had found something at which he could excel, and for which he would win praise and recognition. But flashes of his life on the street shone through.
If I think about where I'm going to hit him and how many times I'm going to hit him, I have everything planned ahead of time. And if I hit him in the body once and I see that hurts, I'm going to hit him in the body at least 20 more times. And then if he's still up after the 20 more times, I'm going to hit him to the head.
Well, he was like a sponge. He first of all, part of what makes a guy a good student is their assets, physically and mentally. Great physical assets, obviously. Speed, good reflexes, power, and he had an innate intelligence, which we later found out. But one of the great assets and qualities you need to be a good student is interest.
I remember he was about 17, and I went up to his room in Catskill, and I said, well, what fighters are you watching now? What fighters do you admire? And he started to talk about Rocky Marciano, Tony Canzoneri, and Carmen Basilio, 3 white guys. And I said, well, why are you studying them? And he says, they all had short arms, they all had to fight guys taller than them, and I want to learn from them how to get inside and overcome a reach disadvantage.
I can remember one day we were sparring, he hit me with just like this ungodly body shot, and it knocked the wind out of me. And I was saying to myself, if he throws another punch, I'm falling down, you know? And I was like, the only thing I could do would feint a punch. And then there's a light here that shows when the light came on, I come walking to the corner, and I could barely breathe. And I can remember Teddy saying something to me, and I'm like, I can't catch my breath. It was just so powerful. I remember there were guys from Albany who were very experienced amateur fighters. They'd come down once or twice, spar with Mike. Gone. You would never see them again.
Tyson chose a nickname, the Tan Terror, and started winning a series of fights. The victories, generally by quick knockouts, started making the local papers. But his growing reputation caused some problems. It became hard to find anyone to step into the ring with him in the local boxing cards known as smokers.
They'd go down to the Apollo Boxing Club in the South Bronx, and they would have lots of fights there. Nobody would fight Tyson. He was 15 years old. Nobody wanted to get in the ring with him. Sometimes when Cus would have the professional sparring partners come up to the gym, they would let Tyson go a few rings with him. They didn't want to fight with him.
In '83 and '84, when he graduated to the senior division, where he was fighting men. He would be fighting men that, you know, and he was beating them.
Tyson was undefeated in his early amateur bouts, going to the Junior Olympics and dispatching 5 opponents in record time, 4 by knockouts. It was the first step on the way to every boxer's biggest goal, making the Olympic team.
It was the first positive things that ever happened in his life. I mean, and he was getting in the newspaper for more than a police blotter.
The quickest route to boxing prominence is an Olympic gold medal, and Tyson, backed by D'Amato, entered the competition to make the U.S. team. It would prove to be his first disappointment in boxing. His opponent in the finals was Tyrell Biggs. Later, as a pro, Tyson would knock him out. But under the Olympic scoring system, Biggs' light jabs counted as much as Tyson's sledgehammer blows. In the Olympic trials, Tyson lost and didn't make the team.
He really got robbed. He really won. Mike should have been the Olympic champion.
With his Olympic hopes dashed, Tyson went off to fight and win in Europe. Though without a gold medal, marketing Tyson would be tougher. Among the key backers at the D'Amato Boxing Club were veteran fight managers Bill Caton and Jimmy Jacobs, who would handle the early career of the promising teenager. Caton came up with a video you're now seeing, a compilation of Tyson's early fights, showing his devastating power.
We made cassettes of all of Mike's fights and got them right out to the television stations.
Even as Tyson was first turning pro, sports writers were not just hearing, they were seeing Tyson at work. His first professional fight was against Hector Mercedes. Didn't last long, and Tyson's reputation grew.
It was in a small arena in Albany, seating only a few hundred people, and that's where Mike made his first appearance against Mercedes. And knocked him out, of course, in the first round.
And he looked like an animal. I mean, when you saw him fight that way, and he fought that ferociously and that well. But what he was really doing was he was being effective. He was technically using what he was taught, and he was real good at it.
Tyson might have been winning in the ring, but outside, he was to suffer devastating personal losses, just as his career was developing. His mother, who had stayed in Brooklyn and who he loved, though he rarely saw her, developed inoperable cancer. Tyson visited her one last time in the hospital, then she quickly died. Suddenly, all Tyson had left was his surrogate family.
I think it was '83 or '82. So then it's at that point, after his mother dies, is when he asked Camille, would you be my mother? And then Cus, I think it was '84, became his legal guardian.
In 1985, Tyson fought 15 pro bouts, all ending in knockouts before the 4th round. But late in that year, as he was marching towards a shot at the heavyweight title, Tyson suffered what would be the most devastating loss of his life. November 4th, Cus D'Amato, the man who replaced what little real family Tyson had, died. Before his 20th birthday, Tyson was once again emotionally alone. The championship fight was 10 months away, but the lessons D'Amato had taught him were what kept Tyson focused as he prepared for the match.
And I asked Mike, as we were driving along one that day, I said, Mike, what would Cus say about this guy, about Berbick? And he said, what do you mean? I said, what kind of fighter do you think Cus would say this guy is? Because I wanted Mike to know exactly what level fighter Berbick was, so he wasn't too terrified, too afraid, too nervous. And Mike thought about it for a second. He said, well, Cus would say this guy's a tomato can. And I said, I just wanted to see if you'd think the same way I do. He said, yeah.
That was a right to the body and an uppercut to the head, and Berbick is down.
19-year-old Mike Tyson dispatched Berbick in the 2nd round, the former street thug becoming the World Boxing Council's heavyweight champion. Tyson, moments after being handed the championship belt, would dedicate the victory to the memory of his teacher, Cus D'Amato. Mike Tyson's managers, starting with Cus D'Amato, had kept the young boxer in the ring, fighting every 3 or 4 weeks. But as the new WBC heavyweight champ, Mike Tyson fought just 4 times in 1987, consolidating the title, with wins over James Smith, Pinklin Thomas, and Tony Tucker, and defending the crown with a revenge victory over Tyrell Biggs, the man who'd won the Olympic medal Tyson had been denied. In 1988, there would be 3 successful defenses, culminating in the sensational knockout of Michael Spinks in Atlantic City.
Michael Spinks has to keep moving because every shot...
Uppercut landed inside and Spinks went down.
That is the first time Michael Spinks has ever been down in a professional fight.
And he's down again and in serious trouble.
Now we know why Butch...
But Mike Tyson, the shy kid from Brooklyn with a lisp, had discovered women. Or, more accurately, they had discovered him. He had called himself the Tan Terror as a teenager, but now the papers were calling him Iron Mike.
With fame and money comes attention, and then, you know, things like a lisp or being this big imposing guy, you know, and now all of a sudden your money makes you look good and they don't hear that lisp.
He's Mike Tyson, he's heavyweight champion of the world. Women are literally lining up to meet him. He can pick and choose, and that has to be, for a guy who didn't know how to handle women to begin with, an absolutely devastating experience. I mean, it's a kid running amok in a candy store.
When he knocked out Larry Holmes, he had Robin Givens in one section, Naomi Campbell in the second section, and Suzette Charles in the third section, and they were all very classy women. He fell in love with Robin Givens.
Let's get the lead out. Yes, dear.
Mike Tyson, the world heavyweight champion, had fallen in love. She was an ambitious young actress whose mother always seemed to be in the picture. He was the champ, worth millions, with the potential for hundreds of millions, but considered immature. The match seemed improbable, but the relationship blossomed suddenly.
Wow, this is great. Unbelievable. I'm with Robin Givens, the star, head of the class.
She had gone to Sarah Lawrence. I think she was higher class than he ever thought he would obtain. And I think one of Mike's weaknesses was that he always had very low self-esteem.
We fight Larry Holmes. I'm not exactly sure how it went. Before the fight or right after the fight, Robin Givens tells Mike Tyson that she's pregnant with his baby. Ruth Roper gets on the phone to Jimmy Jacobs and Bill Cate and says, your fighter has made my daughter pregnant. I want him to marry her.
Mike Tyson and Robin Givens were married on February 7th, 1988. Givens would announce she'd had a miscarriage shortly thereafter. Despite that, there were hopes in the Tyson camp that the marriage to the actress would work out.
Of course, the idea of Mike being married was something that appealed to me. I felt it would give him a certain stability. He was a womanizer. There's no other way to describe him. He loved women, and women loved him. And I felt that this was a good step. I was all in favor of his marriage.
The tabloid headlines were still to come. The published reports of fights in the Bernardsville, New Jersey mansion Givens and Tyson had bought. Tyson, though, was already telling his friends that the marriage wasn't working. And those who spent time with Tyson daily saw a dangerous trend, with Robin Givens and her mother taking over.
He beats Tubbs. On the plane ride back, Robin Givens and Ruth Roper announced, I'm Mrs. Tyson. Everything goes through me. And they start spending his money.
Before they got married, she was terrific. She was kind, she was warm, she was considerate. But once they got married, she announced, I'm Mrs. Mike Tyson, and I'm taking over. And when I heard that, I knew we were in trouble. I knew Mike was in trouble. I said, this is going to be bad. This is bad. This is bad. And from then on, she tried to pull him away. And in Tokyo, in '88, after 1 month of marriage, he came in the room one day and started crying. And he put his head on my shoulder. I said, what's the matter? And he said, I made a mistake. I said, what? He said, I shouldn't have gotten married. This is bad. I shouldn't have gotten married. I said, Mike, everything's gonna be okay. This will be okay. I was wrong. I was wrong.
Just how wrong was becoming clear. Tyson and Givens were driving one of his Bentleys when they started arguing. Tyson became so angry that he jumped out of the vehicle and told surprised police officers they could keep it, though the next day he sent an aide to get it back. In training, Tyson looked great as he prepared for another title defense. But outside of the gym, things were getting badly out of control. Robin Givens' mother, Ruth Roper, was painted in newspaper stories as the architect of a scheme to grab Tyson's millions. Givens rushed to her mother's defense on live television.
I plan to be here today because I'm angry, because my mother, who has been the best mother and clearly become Michael's mother, and if you can just see their relationship, it's a beautiful relationship, is really being crushed by all this.
Sensational charges flew. Allegations that Givens and her mother were trying to eliminate the people who'd brought Tyson to greatness. Givens portrayed herself as a loyal wife, trying to protect her husband against boxing sharks, who she claimed were stealing Tyson's money. With a vicious behind-the-scenes battle for control, only in the ring did Tyson seem safe. But that, too, would change.
His fight with Spinks, he may have been one of the two best heavyweights of all time. The moves he made in that fight were extraordinary to knock out Spinks, who was a very capable fighter in 91 seconds. But then he fired Kevin. He broke off from me.
Ruth Roper hits Bill Kane with a lawsuit the day of the fight that I know in my heart Mike Tyson knew nothing about.
1988 became a blur of embarrassments and disasters for the champ. Just 2 months after the triumph of the Spinks fight and the break from his longtime manager and trainer, Tyson was arrested after breaking his hand in a street brawl with Mitch Green, a boxer he'd beaten 2 years earlier in the ring. The argument had begun inside a boutique in Harlem. Green, verbally, hit directly at Tyson's weak spot.
He's a young, dumb knucklehead that got to ask his wife for permission to do whatever he do. You understand what I'm trying to say?
Mitch Green wasn't the only one saying it. And it seemed Tyson would have to choose between his old friends and his new wife. Robin Givens was saying his manager, Bill Caton, had cheated him, that he needed to change the people handling his career. What wasn't widely known was that she and her mother had been getting advice from Don King, the colorful and controversial boxing promoter. King is painted by Tyson's early friends as one of the principal villains in the story.
And it was almost as if Robin Givens was the jab that set him up for the right hand of Don King.
I'm a controversial figure because I succeed in spite of, not because of. Many people that have been beleaguered with the problems that I've been assaulted and assailed with would have been gone a long time ago. They wouldn't even be here.
Don King had become Tyson's new father figure. If Tyson had spent his life in search of someone to replace the dad he'd never had, friends say, starting from when he was very young, often his choices didn't work out.
When you're out in the street looking for guidance, who do you get it from? It's easy to get attached to people. Sometimes you realize later in life that your friends were really your worst enemies.
Mike Tyson was the world heavyweight champion. And on the streets of Brownsville, where he'd spent his early years, there were murals in his honor. But in a throwback to his days on these mean streets, Tyson had broken his hand in a street brawl. Behind the scenes, Tyson's personal life had become increasingly bizarre. The arguments between Tyson and his wife, Robin Givens, continued and escalated, with rumors being printed in newspapers about the most intimate details, some of them completely false.
They inserted into Mike's head that Robin was having an affair with Donald Trump. This was the beginning of the end, because this did two things for Don King. It put Mike's perfect marriage on the rocks, and it also cracked the relationship that Donald Trump had with Tyson.
Trump, the prominent New York developer, had tried to straighten out Tyson's increasing financial and management problems and secure Tyson's fights as an attraction for his Atlantic City hotels. For a while, Trump added stability to Tyson's professional life, but his personal life was increasingly troubled. September 4th, 1988, Tyson was raced to a hospital after he smashed his wife's BMW into a tree. Robin Givens rode in the ambulance and almost battled with photographers trying to take Tyson's picture.
Give the guy a break, okay? Give him a break, damn it! Give him a break!
But a newspaper claimed Tyson had attempted suicide after another argument with Givens.
So if anybody wants to kill himself, would he hit the side of the car? He would go straight for the tree. He went on the side of the car. It's scary because I was standing right over here.
I knew it wasn't Mike trying to commit suicide. What I did know is Mike can't drive at all. Mike just can't drive, so I just brushed that off. That was so silly. Why didn't he try it again with another BMW? Had 25 cars. So it was so silly, it was ridiculous.
Michael is intimidating, to say the least. I think that there's a time when he cannot control his temper.
His temper wasn't the only thing getting out of control. Tyson and Robin Givens appeared on the ABC program 2020, and Tyson sat there docilely as his wife ripped him apart on national television. But the most damaging line about the world champion was yet to come.
Michael is a manic depressive. He is. I mean, that's just a fact. And just recently, I've become afraid. I mean, very, very much afraid.
I like to raise hell, I mean, because that's basically my nature. I mean, coming from my background and everything, but I mean, I'm not a violent guy. I would never want to hurt anyone.
One of them was going to hurt each other, and she decided to do it that night to expose what they were going to, because Robin never realized that Mike's buttons were being pushed. When we walked into that house, he was a 200-pound gorilla.
Robin does the 20/20 and paints this brutal picture of Mike Tyson. He looked like he was dazed, like he just wasn't there. It was a few days later that, you know, he blew his stack.
At no time did the police observe Mr. Tyson strike or threaten anyone.
Blowing his stack, this time, meant a huge argument with Givens in which Tyson reportedly hurled furniture out of the window of the Bernardsville mansion the couple shared. Soon the police arrived. They just as quickly left. But Tyson's marriage was in shambles, as was his image.
They convinced Mike that he was manic depressive, which he wasn't. In fact, Mike actually stated to the press that he was manic depressive. They put him, when I say they hired or retained the services of a psychiatrist who put him on lithium, a very dangerous mind-altering drug, so that, and kept reminding Mike to take the drug, which he should never have taken in the first place.
It was time for major damage control, and Tyson's longtime friend stepped in, hiring their own psychiatrist.
When I saw him, he showed no sign whatsoever of psychotic thinking or behavior, and none of the criteria that are required to establish a diagnosis of manic depressive illness.
Givens was on the way out. But despite the favorable diagnosis, Tyson's temper was so frayed that one morning when he spotted a cameraman taping his training run, he hurled his Walkman at the lens. Tyson wouldn't admit it, but his breakup with Givens was not something he wanted. His friends say he really was in love with his wife.
I made a huge mistake. I forgot what it was like for a young guy to think he was in love, to be in love, to think you're in love, and lose the woman of your dreams, to lose this woman. For whatever reason, Mike was distraught. He was really sad. He didn't show it, he's a professional, but I should have realized he was that sad, that emotionally distraught. And I should have stayed with him, I should have been with him, I should have taken him on a trip somewhere to make him forget his troubles, and he would have been fine. That was my mistake.
Because everything was chaos. I was fighting with a wife, with managers, you know, with promoters and managers fighting. I was torn between everybody because I wanted to be loyal to everyone. I never had a chance to be loyal to myself.
I think he became more and more of a lost soul. Trained less and less, hung out more and more with these pimps and drug dealers and rap musicians. And there was no one in his life to reinforce the positive values, and no one in his life who loved him enough to say, no, you can't do that.
By all accounts, Mike Tyson was headed for a fall. He was still fighting, and for the moment holding on. But those who taught him and saw him rise were seeing their hard work evaporate. February 25th, 1989, Mike Tyson beat underdog Frank Bruno. But Bruno started strong. Tyson, for the first time, seemed less than invincible in the ring.
He'd no longer slip punches. He came right in straight. He didn't bob and weave. He didn't punch in combination. He was no longer the same fighter he was when he was being taught by Kevin Rooney.
He rocks Tyson in the first round. Rocked him. He doesn't finish him. He should have. He doesn't. Mike knocks him out in the fifth round. I saw 100 mistakes. 100.
Tyson wasn't really challenged when he knocked out Carl Williams 5 months later in a first-round walkover. His next scheduled bout was with Buster Douglas, a title defense with someone who should have been an easy opponent, but Tyson seemed to have lost his intensity, the animal power that had propelled him to the top. He was overconfident, out of shape. Buster Douglas was in shape and proved it, blasting Tyson hard.
Douglas landed that punch, but he was beating Mike the whole fight. And if you look at that fight from the introductions on, Mike was not himself. His mind seemed a million miles away. He lacked that animal intensity. It was like an imposter had invaded his body.
Mike never trained for that fight. Mike was in no condition for that fight.
Mike's techniques eroded, and when the other guy starts throwing punches, Mike starts getting hit because he doesn't practice the techniques anymore. And when you add the combination together, and a very finely tuned Buster Douglas, confident, trained, at the right spot at the right time, very relaxed, trying, doing his best, it was the wrong combination for Tokyo. And Mike got knocked out in 10 rounds.
It's over. It's over.
Mike Tyson has been knocked out.
And when I was champion, I gave everybody a chance, and I didn't like anyone making any kind of excuses when I beat them. So by all means, I'm not going to make any excuses. I lost. The reason I lost, you know what I mean, not irrelevant. Just a loss is a loss.
You take the bitter with the sweet, so we on crack.
And I still believe I'm the best fighter in the world. Just give me another chance. The titles are meant to be won, and they're meant to be lost. These things happen. But, you know, like I said, I'm the former champion. Just give me a rematch.
Tyson wanted to fight Douglas again, but Don King didn't seem to be pushing hard for the rematch. As the controversy swirled, there were even louder questions about the pairing of the ex-champ and the promoter. Allegations that King's side called sour grapes. Complaints that King should not try to be both Tyson's manager and promote his fights.
A manager tries to get as much money for his fighter as possible. A promoter tries to pay the fighter as little as he can because he keeps the difference between the income and what he pays the fighter. So there's a basic conflict of interest between a promoter and a fighter.
Though he'd started his boxing comeback with a series of 4 impressive victories, Tyson went out of the gym, was alone and isolated. Then Don King asked him to come to the Miss Black America pageant in Indianapolis, saying it would help his tarnished image. Tyson's bodyguard and chauffeur says Tyson was in no mood to go, having spent the day at a memorial service for a friend.
Don insisted that he do this Indianapolis thing. He needed to do this because he needed to go there and represent all the black people of America, and it's your duty, you're a black man, and he hides behind that black rage of black and black and black, and finally he gets to this guy to a point where he says, all right, I'll go. Just leave me alone. Get us 2 tickets and we'll be there. I was on that US Air flight with Mike Tyson that morning prior to boarding when Dale Everett's, Mike Tyson's, Don King's nephew, police officer, shows up that Don King has a new set of orders, that they're escorting Mike Tyson to Indianapolis, and I'm to drive one of the Ferraris back to Ohio and wait for Mike to come home.
Hello, my name is Desiree.
Mike Tyson would later say his evening with Desiree Washington hadn't seemed that out of the ordinary to him. But the teenage Miss Black America contestant story, told to a 911 operator, was of a date she'd remember for all the wrong reasons.
I went out with this person in the limousine that night, and the person told me that he had to go in to get his bodyguard and asked me if I wanted to come in for a second. And I said, oh, okay, fine, thinking that this was a nice person. And we went in, and the person started attacking me.
The report coming into Indianapolis Police Headquarters July 19, 1991, was the kind of sad story police hear all the time. But this time, the accused rapist was Mike Tyson, a world-renowned heavyweight boxer.
I came out of the bathroom and this person was in his underwear, and he just basically kind of did what he wanted to do, and he kept saying, don't fight me, and I was like saying, no, get off me, please, get off me, and he was like, don't fight me, and the person was a lot stronger than I was, and he just did what he wanted, and I was saying, stop, please, stop, and he just didn't stop, and okay, now who's wrong?
Mike Tyson had met Washington when he was brought to the Miss Black America pageant by promoter Don King. The visit was a publicity stunt in the middle of Tyson's preparation for his first big money fight after losing the World Heavyweight Championship. Tyson had asked Washington out on a date. She'd accompanied him back to room 606 in the Canterbury Hotel, his room, well after midnight. Tyson's account of what happened recorded on audio tape when he testified before a grand jury, was that the only thing he'd done wrong was not treating Washington nicely after they had sex. He hadn't walked her to the door.
I said, I want you. She said, I want to be me and you alone. Yeah. I want you. Yeah. What did she say? She said, okay, just call me. Did you say anything else? No, I had to leave.
He's grabbed every woman in town.
Mike Tyson was used to fans and victories. But when he came to the Marion County Courthouse, he was headed for the worst defeat of his life. Tyson would see what was left of his glory stripped from him, as a jury of 8 men and 4 women convicted the former world heavyweight boxing champion of rape. Sentenced to 6 years in prison, Tyson was led away in handcuffs.
He's been convicted beyond a reasonable doubt. He's a convicted felon. He's a rapist. He needs to go to penitentiary like everybody else does.
Every minute that Mr. Tyson is in confinement is a minute of
It
injustice.
had been more than half his lifetime since young Mike Tyson had spent his time behind bars, and Tyson's attorneys battled, unsuccessfully, to keep him out of jail pending an appeal. But the conviction on rape charges proved more than a legal knockdown, and it sounded as if it might be the final bell. Mike Tyson seemed to have destroyed himself as spectacularly as he'd burst upon the scene.
Tyson was never meant to be a great champion. He didn't have the character. He was meant to be a shooting star. He was meant to be a sensational shooting star.
But halfway through his sentence, in an interview, Tyson said that when he emerged from prison, he'd fight again. And he declared he isn't upset with a woman who'd accused him of date rape.
I'm not angry at it. I just despise the actions.
Welcome to Larry King Live. Tonight on our King Size Week, Mike Tyson.
So there's no bitterness? Or is there?
I'm not bitterness, but, this is one time I would like to have a little revenge. You know what I mean? I always go from this perspective. Whatever happens, you know what I mean? And sometimes you hit me with your best shot, and we see how I handle it. But when the same thing happens to you, you must always remember never to take it personal. I never take this personal.
Tyson's friends say it was the completion of a tragic circle. Tyson was totally alone. The key figures in his life were gone, just when Iron Mike needed them most.
If any lesson that Mike Tyson has taught me, as my experience, is that money cannot buy you happiness. It can only buy you time until you realize that you're not happy. And that's the question here. He wasn't happy. When those boxing lights went out and those rings and everybody got a cut of their millions, and I was still sitting with the same guy who I met 6 years ago, who had no friends, no interests.
But my situations of my life have to be conducted totally different than it was before. The Mike Tyson that was out there before conducting business was just a child. I wanted to tie it up. I was just 20, just turned 20, I wanted to tie it up. I was just a child. And I left, I had no chance to cultivate myself. Because if I did cultivate, I didn't cultivate in the proper direction because everything was chaos.
In prison, Mike Tyson says he is a changed man. He has converted to a new religion, Islam. But he's fallen back to an old belief about those around him.
I believe everyone that's involved in my life, one day or the other, will betray me. I believe that. I'm totally believe that.
Artist Leroy Neiman is one of those who visited Tyson in jail.
He's smaller and lighter, but he's clean. His complexion is clean, and his eyes are just completely pure and clean. He listens, he's sharp, he's relaxed, he's counting the days, I guess.
The greatest country in the world, man. This is America, baby. Okay.
Don King was facing his own legal troubles, having just been indicted for insurance fraud when he was asked about Tyson's future.
What do you think he can come out and fight and win? Yes. Yes.
I've been robbed and abused and taken advantage of all my life and lied to. I'm not going back into that same predicament again. You know what I mean? Eventually, I'm going to have a family, and I'm going to have children, and I have to set an example for that. I'm a specialist in it. I'm just a specialist. There's no doubt about it. And Allah forgive me for being vain, but I'm just expressing the fact I'm the best in what I do. I'm just the total best. There's guys out there that are great. They're great fighters, but they could do anything else. This is all I want to do.
The youngest and new WBC heavyweight champion of the world, Michael Tyson.
Will Mike Tyson make a comeback?
Some say his time spent in the Indiana Youth Detention Center has only served to make him hungrier and more willing to do whatever it takes to regain the glory of his past. But whether or not Mike Tyson ever becomes champ again, there's little doubt that boxing promoters around the world will see his return to civilian life as an opportunity to stage some of the biggest, most lucrative boxing matches of all time. When Tyson is released, they'll be waiting.